Welcome to the OC24 podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. In this series, we'll bring you 12 of the best talks from this year's 24-hour conference on global organised crime. This episode is called Women in Organised Crime Groups in Latin America.
Women have always worked alongside their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their partners, their sons. They have been couriers, they've been mules, they've been fixers, lookouts, financiers, money launderers, and confidants, and bosses, and the list goes on, right, in organized crime. Assassins, sicarios, you know, so this is part of, again, that they're there, they're hiding in plain sight. And so what I like to say is that literally the questions or the ideas or the mindset is what leads to those blinders, and you just pass over them. So that's what my work is really interrogating and complicating, and demonstrating that they're there, and they have been there for a very long time.
Thank you, Elaine. That is wonderful. And I also wonder, again, like what people like Patricia, Deborah, and Carolina are seeing, you know, in the contemporary, you know, context of Latin America in terms of like biases or blind spots in terms of reporting and investigation is later on, you know, what historians in 20, 30 years will find or not find, right, given these silences, no? So it's interesting to think about, you know, again, how the blind spots that we have today impact the ways in which this is gonna, you know, go through history, no, or become like part of collective memories or not memories, or rather. Carolina, do you want to jump in with this first round of questions?
Thank you, Gemma. The phrase that Philia Allen and Anna Mitchell put in their last book, which is actually that women are footnotes in men's book, which I think is very, very nice. It's a nice way to understand the actual role that women are supposed to be playing at organized crime, the way as Elaine just mentioned, it's registered. Unfortunately, and I may say that in my case, I'm trying to understand the role of women from another point of view. Particularly, I'm wondering if law enforcement agencies see women as criminal actors or not. And regarding that way of looking at women and at criminal organizations in general, we could have an idea of the security policies that the states develop in order to fight criminal organizations, organized crime in general. At the beginning, I may say, as one of the first things I could say, it is very difficult to get to the information, as Deborah was saying. In the case of Mexico, there may be more information available. In the case of Brazil, for example, it's very difficult to get into the sources. I have been interviewing a lot of prosecutors, for example, federal police, and I have noticed that not all the organizations have like the same relation with women. In the case of Brazil, for example, the Primeiro Comando da Capital, the PCC, it's a very men-kind organization. They actually don't like women to be involved in that organization. It's a prison-based system, but it doesn't mean that there are no women. Of course, it will see some of the Mexican organizations, such as the Jalisco Nueva Generación. We may find much more women around there. I think one of the explanations may be related to one of the things that Elaine was pointed out, that is the historical point of view, right? Because these cartels have been alive for much more time, and many of these women grow in these environments and are part of these familias delincuenciales, right? These delinquential families. So it is more accepted in those environments that women may belong to the criminal organizations. I, of course, think that there are many grays, that nothing can be all black or all white. And I'm referring to your first comment regarding the idea of women being, victims or either being absolutely absent. I think they are present in many ways. They are part of the change that can keep the drug trafficking organizations, the criminal organizations in general, going. Without this woman, it doesn't matter if they are at the low part of the pyramid or if they are taking middle to high level charges, but they are, like keeping the organization alive.
Thank you, Carolina. You're making me think also, statistically, the overrepresentation of women that are in prison due to drug crimes is very clear, no? And so it's interesting that we have, on the one hand, like these silences and these blind spots of not acknowledging fully their participation, and on the other hand, you see their overrepresentation, which clearly, on the one hand, reflects the fact that they are in the lower echelons of, these criminal groups, their specific vulnerability, but also perhaps the tendency of some of these law enforcement institutions to, over-criminalize them, or rather because it's easier perhaps to put them in prison, and the consequences, the dramatic consequences that has in the quality of life of their families or their communities, etc. So it's interesting to hear this. I'm listening to you. And sorry, Deborah and Carolina, for not having your up-to-date bios, and thank you for sharing with the panelists and also with our audience your current positions. So the next question that I would like us to reflect on, and I really like this conversational tone that we are having, is about the methodological challenges. Some of you already mentioned some of the questions that you have faced. How have you sorted them out? Clearly it is more difficult to get at women's voices or stories. So how have you tried to sort out those challenges? And how would you say that those challenges differ from tracing the participation of men in these groups? Because after all, we are talking about illicit activities that it's not easy to, trace the story or get the facts right. So there are, I'm sure, commonalities in terms of tracing men's and women's participations. So how have you sorted those out? And if you don't mind, we'll follow the same order. So Patricia, I'm glad we can see your image now.
I'm very glad to be here. At the beginning, we have to remember that narco was a topic in media, the press, the journalism. As a journalist, maybe 20 years ago, that subject was on papers, okay? And when researchers began to abord it, to get an approach of this phenomena, was very interesting, but always is trust. Methodologically, you just must generate trust in order to approach these women or these men. Every person who is in illegal activities. So it's a matter of self-protection if you are living in the same place where these people is living and working. For example, in my case, ELAINE has visited Culiacan recently, and I trust a lot when I say self-protection is a very important issue when you are working in the place. I'm in Culiacan, Sinaloa. I live here, and it's difficult, for example, if I make an interview with a person who lives here, because people who is observing is relating to persons. And if something came out, some information, maybe it's the risk. You were talking to Patricia about this, or who was talking with a journalist or a researcher. It's the same risk for a researcher as the same risk for a journalist. But we cannot use cams or audio recorders. We know this easily. Most of the time we have to write as they speak. This is important. And research ethics is very important tool at the moment you want to enter to this world of shadows, which is very dangerous when you put a spotlight in a person who wants to remain anonymous. I think trust and self-protection are very important, because in the research field in journalism, we don't want heroes. We want the truth. We want to try to understand what's happening in every kind of these organizations are very low profile. So we have to try to not risk our life or our integrity when we work in these cases of drug trafficking. Trust and GEMA is the key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patricia. Deborah, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, we've all touched on this a little bit, but I think first of all, there's sort of the invisibility of women's cases, which is in part a reflection of this male gaze. And I do think, I mean, female defense lawyers disagree with me who have represented women drug traffickers. They think that it's not as biased as I suspect it may be, because I think that, you know, most massive drug-related investigations in Latin America are pushed by the US, right? So it's DEA agents putting pressure on local and federal fiscalias to investigate groups that investigate the groups that they've identified as the worst. That's certainly the case in Central America. Very little investigation really happens without pressure from the DEA. And most of those people are men. And most of those people see the biggest players in organized crime through the lens of violence, which is an important dynamic, I won't deny. And women can also be extremely violent, as we all know. But it also discounts some of the major players who may not be violent actors. You know, just some examples. One of Chapo's chief money launderers was Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia. She's practically invisible. I mean, you Google her and you'll see that she pleaded guilty in Chicago, and then her case goes completely cold. And I'm like, she was the highest ranking woman in the Sinaloa cartel that we know of. And yet everyone's talking about Emma Coronel because she was sexually involved with Chapo. Like, all of this reflects these kind of patriarchal, sexually obsessed narratives around women, one. But the consequence of that is there isn't very much investigation into women, or their cases are away to the powerful men. That's certainly a pattern that I've found. I've had real trouble, and I would love any advice. I've had real trouble getting hold of substantial legal documents in Mexico about cases in Mexico. It's even hard for me to track down where women are in prison. If there's no press coverage, or, you know, something in the media, I can't even find where they are. I can't find out who their lawyers are. You know, it's really difficult to track down the basic information that you get by logging into PACER. And that has been one of the massive incumbents for me. Plus, a lot of those court documents, you know, the transcripts that you get on PACER from stuff that goes on in the courtroom, a lot of that stuff isn't officially public, at least not in Mexico. So it's very difficult to piece together, you know, for me as a journalist, you know, I'm a lot less thorough historically, but for me, it's about piecing together scenes, conversations, you know, exchanges, drama. And these things you can get from conversations that take place in courtrooms. And the only real, like, you know, substantial supply of those I have found is the American justice system. So the women that I chose to focus on was very much reliant on, am I going to have access to this kind of detail about their processes? Apart from the few women who did agree to speak to me. And I also, I had some contact with women in the US, and I managed to get into prison in Central America to visit one of the women that I focused on, who's known as the female Chapo. Oh, irony. So yeah, I mean, the male gaze, I think, and this general sort of lack of focus on women contributes to a lack of, substantial materials. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If there's no focus on them, there's no media coverage, there's no like legal documentation, and it just kind of, and so there's no, few people then dedicate themselves to investigating it and so it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. But that said, and I'm sure it's been the same for all of you girls, like, look and you will find. And I think all of the cases that I pieced together on Las Patronas was public information that had been there for years, and it's just no one had gone to unpick it. So I do think it's getting better, but I think it's also related, and this will be my last point, sorry, it's related also to this kind of, the Me Too movement, the changing dynamic around genders, this leaving behind of these kind of gender tropes that I think have fallen away in many other industries, but because organized crime is so invisible, it's a little bit behind in terms of our understanding of it. It's harder to see and detect those changes in the way that we see them in football and tennis and the banking industry and all these other industries where women have come to rise up. So I think it's understandable that organized crime is always going to be a bit, it was always going to take us longer to recognize those things. But I also think these public conversations about changing gender tropes and stereotypes has helped bring out the interest and thus the investigation.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely fascinating. And I might go back in the next round to Patricia, because I was wondering, listening to you and to Patricia, if your positionality, or being read, as a female reporter, does that matter in terms of the type of access that you can get to women's stories? Has that matter or not? Does that make a difference? I wonder if in your work as journalist, does this make a difference? Your positionality and specifically, being read as a woman. And one thing, just very briefly, so fascinating about Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia, is that her name? It's just incredible to me, because it also, yes, the story is about men with guns, and Patricia was also mentioning this, and this kind of reproduces also the myth about drug trafficking as being completely separated from, bloodless crimes and from all of these networks of corruption. So the story centers on the violence, and all of these other characters that are making this possible from other social classes and also from other genders don't get in the story.
I hate to say it, but it has to be said. I would say 60 or 70% of the women that I focused on were in their 50s or older. They weren't conventionally attractive, like in a babe sort of way. Like, they didn't have any of those qualities that would make, the like bombastic gun-toting babe headline, or get Hollywood producers salivating over some, psycho babe bitch who, has killed 150 people. Like, all of these very established narratives we have about women in crime, which are just so annoying and patronizing and false. But it's almost like very few of my women fit into that, and I think that's another reason why they didn't draw attention. And I'm sure the other panelists have come across that too.
Yeah. Elaine, really looking forward to listening your reflections on methodological challenges and how to sort them out from the archive and all the extensive work you've done in this topic.
Right. I think, and this goes along with the same thing that Deborah was talking about, but I also wanted to touch on something that Patricia mentioned, is about, I've always worked alongside journalists and worked with them very closely, in part because it's a comfort level. I consider myself a writer. It is something I've done throughout my career. So there has to be an aspect of respect and trust. and integrity, and also, you know, those methodological questions and how you approach the topic and how you approach somebody. And so, you know, that also goes into the historical aspect of looking at the documents themselves and really, and also being willing to find them. And I think that aspect of mining resources, and rather than saying, here's what I'm trying to prove to the archivist, find those documents for me, is actually having the integrity and the time and the patience and the tenacity to let the story be told to you in the aspect of the research that you're doing, and to pursue that. And so that, and I recognize, you know, especially with COVID and some of the challenges that has presented to historians, that is not easy. But I have been working alongside archivists and librarians for many, many years, and they are my partners and they have helped me. And that partnership is very similar to partnerships that I forged with working with journalists, is that I can learn from them, and they also have been amazing in working with me. So I was at one time stumbling around a law library in my former institution, and the dean of the library came out and said, what do you do? What are you looking for? What's going on? I told her, I said, hey, I'm a drug researcher. I work on Mexico. I have no concept about how to find these documents in the US. I didn't know. And she's like, come into my office. And it was the best 3 hours I ever spent. And that changed my life. And then as things became, you know, digitized, I hear her voice in my mind, you know, whenever I'm like, I got that one. And I know it's because of her. So, you know, just being open to that and building those relationships, I think methodologically is really important. So whether you're working with journalists, or you're working with librarians and archivists, or you're working with big data specialists or whatever, be open to that, ask questions, and be ready to learn. The other thing I want to think about, you know, I always consider about the challenges goes back to what Deborah was saying about being invisible, and all these stereotypes about women, that the only women who have merit or who should be studied are those who are attractive or beautiful or whatever. And so that's the women who are the most successful in organized crime. I'll be frank, they're not young. As some women have said to an ethnographer and I who work together, you know, I don't have a boob job because then I have to actually alter my bulletproof vest. So, you know, these ideas, these concepts that the only woman who can be successful in this area is a young, very attractive, very beautiful woman, when in fact, the men aren't really, who are very successful, aren't young, aren't attractive. And sometimes their sexuality is up for questioning too, or their personal habits. And so, you know, those are things that I think are important and to keep in mind. The other thing is anytime you're doing work on people who are kind of working in the shadows, right? That, you know, to be public, no one donates. Well, now we have social media, and that's great. If you're grabbing that stuff, again, working with people who do a lot of digital, big data analysis, stuff like that. But, you know, for the most part, it wasn't that drug traffickers were giving their papers to libraries and archives. That's starting to change. But the aspect is that, you know, there are those documents there. But then you also, they're produced frequently by the state. And so there also has to be a mindset of your methodology. That's why your definition is really important. What is organized crime? What does it mean? And understanding your role, you know, as a historian or as a researcher, going back to what Patricia said about, you know, integrity and honesty, but also being skeptical and thinking about that material and in fact, reading against the grain, right? And then validating and finding information to support what you're seeing. So one case I worked on, which was the Maria Wendt case in my book, that took me years to piece together. The book came out in 2014. I worked on that case for 10 years, trying to find that material. And that meant the New York Public Library, John Jay College Library, the Roosevelt Archives, and then resources in Mexico City. And it was a case study that I thought I could not find enough material, but I was tenacious and I kept asking questions and asking for help among not only librarians and archivists, but other scholars too. And so I think that that's part of what, we have to think about the challenges. And I would say it's not just for women, it's also for men. I think frequently what we have for men, it's in the studies of masculinity and organized crime are very superficial. They never address the complexities, not only the complexity of the person, but the complexity of their entire life. And that's where, again, gender can come into play, that gender analysis.
Thank you, Elaine. I agree completely. I'm very interested, Carolina, like how do you deal with these questions? No, I mean, as a political scientist, like working with these issues in the present day context. What are your tips? I'm taking notes, by the way, and I think this has been very beneficial for everybody listening to us. And also, I just want to address that I see there is a question from the audience. I will read it to the panelists once we finish our next round of questions. So, Carolina.
First, I would like to meet in person with you. We like for 24 hours, the whole time talking about this, because it's so much, there are so many issues we can discuss. And I would like to take some of the highlights you made, Gema, because the other part of my research is focused in the multiplication of woman inmate regarding drug sales, strict drug sales, I mean. So it seems to be that at the lower level, the work of law enforcement agency, it's genderized. Because if we see at the lower level the tensions regarding women or men, it had grew in both cases, but in the case of the females, have grew considerably more. So it is important to see what is happening there. Why are these women in Latin America in particular being detained related to street sales of drugs? And the other thing I would like to add, related to this too, is that we are talking the whole time about drugs. And it is true that in Latin America, this is the most important manifestation of organized crime, but we don't have to forget about the others. And women in money laundering seems to be having a very important role. Also in human trafficking, for a long time, there have been there, not only from the very beginning, recruiting other women in general, but also managing the business. Of course, there are women all over the place, not only in those manifestations, but I don't want to, narrow it only to the drug trafficking. Other point, the images you were mentioning, who are these women? They are not only old, or I don't know, with, I may say, more than 40, 50 years old. They are regular women, and they dress like moms, And this is a very strong idea, because moms do not hurt. Moms are supposed to be good. And I think there is a very strong link between the idea of we have of this woman and why are we not targeting them as criminals. That being said, regarding the methodology, it is very difficult. I don't do field work as Patricia and Elaine. I work in different way. I work a lot with ethnographies and interviews. Most of the time in a very preserved environment, because as Patricia was telling, it's a very dark world to get into. And I should recognize that many of the times I have been afraid to be further. And I try to respect that, because no one will take care of you if you don't take care of yourself. So I try to work, through actors connected with those actors. And then, of course, you have the documents, the media information, which is also very, I don't know how to say, but narrow it. We know that media is not taking enough attention to this woman that actually seems to be in charge, and they are diverting the attention to the buchonas kind of time. So it is very difficult, and we also have to make our choice every day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carolina. I have a couple more questions, and also questions connected to what you are mentioning right now, including the role of social media and how media plays or not a role in your methodology, and also the usage of these, female actors in these organized criminal groups, and also some other question about family and sentimental ties. But before getting into that, let me just read the question that we have from the audience, and this question is open to any of you. This comes from Jennifer Salahoop. It says, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. I would love to hear your reflections on how organized criminal groups are using gender, women's gender in particular, to further their interest. We know that terrorist organizations, for example, use gender quite effectively to mobilize people. I wonder if and how organized criminal groups use it, and if there are opportunities for policymakers to disrupt, destabilize, leverage this to address drug trafficking, organized crime. Many thanks. So the floor is yours. Anybody that wants to just raise your hand or just unmute your microphone and go ahead. I see Elaine and Deborah, I think, also. Elaine?
Yeah, I'm just going to be really quick. I think, the organized crime is very attractive. It's very sexy. It has historically been so. What was presented even in newspapers in the past, people in clubs and dance, just all those aspects that attracted women. And there's been some great oral histories done in the US of women who were drawn into organized crime, and they were captivated by it, as well as, I Married the Mob type novels or something like that. And so it is, and in fact, sometimes that's to draw women in, and frequently the women were employed within the organization too, doing different things. And that's historical also, whether it's, confidants, mules, fixers or something like that. And I think a good example is like Virginia Hill, historically in the US.
Deborah?
I to add to that, I have spoken to a number of prosecutors and criminal defense lawyers in the US who've represented female drug traffickers. And most of them say that women use the fact that they're underestimated to move more discreetly. I'm sure, I think all women have egos just like men. But I think there's an opportunity to play with the fact that they're less suspect than men to go about their business, their organized criminal business. So I think a lot of women are smart and they use it to their advantage rather than getting upset about it. That's my view.
Carolina?
I absolutely agree with Deborah. I was thinking about that. For me, women use this silence as a strategy. This is a strategy to develop the business as good as they can, on one hand. On the other hand, something that was mentioned on the question 2, I think that the role that women had putting together, the link between criminal organization and communities is also very strong. And if we talk about criminal governance, we need to think on the role of this woman. These women, in many times, especially in low-income neighborhoods, are the ones that organize the community. And if they have a relation with criminal organizations, they will be a link with that criminal organizations. Which also leads me to another very important thing, that is that if the criminal organization build the legitimacy in that communities, that could become a political capital that may be explode in the political field by the political elite.
Thank you. Patricia, do you want to add something to this or?
Well, regarding this, Gemma, I prepared some slides, and maybe it's not, we have no time for every one of this slide, but I put something like types of roles of women in organized crime. I think when we talk about women in organized crime, we have to have a clear idea what kind of roles have these women. Because we are talking about news, that is something that is vanishing. I can say that regarding talking about technology or equality between men and women when they are searched in, for example, in an airport, and we have the role of these beauty women, trophy women, the buchonas that we said in Sinaloa. ELAINE said beautiful women are this kind of women, isn't it? It's very different from a mule, who is a very normal woman. It's a very low profile woman. But it's different also if we talk about laundering money woman. I mean, it's very different, the stereotype or the idea that we have of this kind of women. And also, if we talk about a boss, a woman like, for example, I think in Sinaloa, it's not the cultural context for have a boss, a woman boss in this cartel, because it's a very macho world. But if we think in a woman like a boss, we have to think in a very beautiful, fancy woman like this woman, the La Reina del Sur, this actress. It's just for Netflix. It's not reality. It's not the real thing that we can see. Okay, our experience in Sinaloa was very different. And also, there is another role that we can find on the south of Mexico, maybe, but not in Sinaloa, is that sicaria woman. Maybe in other context, we can find her, but not here. It's not the same if a woman uses violence against another woman because jealousy or something like that. It's not the same thing. We are talking about roles of women in organized crime. It's the same with men. We have to think that it's different. Buchón, narco, sicario, dealer, burrero. It's very different. This is a structure very, very complex. It's a very complex structure. So when we talk about women in organized crime, we have to have a clear idea of the types of roles. I think it's important.
No, thank you. This is extremely interesting. I mean, I'm thinking too. I mean, we know this hasn't been researched enough, no? I mean, which makes the work of all of you even more valuable, and it's making me think also how productive it would be, you know, cross comparisons. No, Carolina was mentioning the case of Brazil. Like I myself have worked, like in the past, I worked with the topic of maras in El Salvador, and I was doing some interviews in terms of participation of women in maras, no, I mean, and it's similarly misunderstood, no, I mean, as you know, women only being able to participate if they are girlfriends, but actually when I interview mareras, they were like, no way, like I'm not a girlfriend. This whole myth that they could just participate if they were raped by 18 members of the gang, no, they felt deeply offended by this. So I think, you know, cross comparison, you know, across the region would be also incredibly productive. But one of the questions that I had, and we're kind of running out of time, but just, I mean, overall, there is this narrative for the Mexican case in particular, like this kind of macro narrative that seems to suggest that drug trade has gone from a process in which these criminal organizations were more family-based and community-based to a certain process of disembeddedness, when they have become like more disembedded from these local communities. Do you see this having an effect in terms of how women participate in these organizations? I mean, is it the case that they participate through family ties and sentimental ties primarily, or not necessarily? I mean, they can enter the business through another door completely. Patricia, you want to say something?
It's a very interesting question, Gemma. Yes, we have to think on the rise of the first drug lords, for example, in Sinaloa. When we talk about narco, the beginning of this phenomenon is Sinaloa, isn't it? In Netflix is Sinaloa, the narco corridos is Sinaloa. So we have a narco made in Sinaloa. This is very important too. It is why, for example, the narco in Michoacan is not so fancy for Netflix series. Why every series from Sinaloa? Elaine, explain me, please, this. Well, Elaine
it's Sinaloa, it's just great.
it's very interesting. So when we talk about the structure of the families, we talk about a man in front of the organization. We can talk about Pedro Avilés, Rafael Caro Quintero, Miguel Ángel Félix, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, El Chapo Guzmán, every lord. But if we talk about a new generation, we must to understand that the new generation, at least in Sinaloa, is Los Chapitos. That is the son of the Chapitos. Next Monday is going to be 3 years of this Culiacanazo, this very, very hard fight against army and the members of the Sinaloan cartel. And I remember this because today I interviewed 2 journalists, 2 friends, colleagues, and they told me about women in drug trafficking. I said, we are discussing this. And they, both men, told me, well, still in Sinaloa, if we talk about illegal or legal business, the man, the father, the heritage is for men, not for women. And we have 40 important businessmen in Sinaloa, just 1 or 2 women. And the heritage of the power is for men in these powerful criminal families. This is a very interesting thing, but if we see what is the problem now in Sinaloa, who is going to take the power of the father or of the good father? Men or women? Obviously men. I think this is a very familiar structure. It's a very cultural context, well known in Sinaloa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patricia. No, this is incredibly useful, but also as you were saying, no, I mean, point at the at Sinaloa, of how unique the case is, and yet how present it is in popular culture or in our current discussions about the topic. Elaine, do you have some thoughts about this question of like family ties, sentimental ties, or other ways in which women get involved?
Yeah, and I don't think it's unique to Mexico. If we're looking at Italian organized crime, Russian organized crime, Eastern European, if we are looking at tongs and how they evolve and women are in kind of rise to the occasion, it's through familial ties, and that goes for women and men. So we're making assumptions that women only gain power through their husbands or their brothers or whatever, but men gain that exact same power too. And I think that's, part of, the work that and conversations that Patricia and I have been having, whether historical or contemporary, that is the case. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some major exceptions, and usually I almost think it's kind of like, somebody in a royal family who, becomes a trusted confidant for whatever reason and is elevated. And then you'll have somebody who has like a skill that is needed, a pilot, an ace pilot, a really good money launderer, somebody, I think of Lilia Parada in the Medellin cartel, who was arrested in the sweeps with Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas and all these other Italian organized crime. She was amazing at logistics. And we don't talk about her. She wasn't part of the family. She worked well with Griselda Blanco. She worked well in the Medellin cartel. But she has disappeared. And it was her skill in logistics, distantly related, but she was elevated. And I think that's what we also see, right? Is somebody has a skill set, they might be a really great banker too, or something like that on the side, and they're brought in, they can launder. And I think something else is important to remember about women, and I just want to put this out there. So if we're thinking about, organizational skills, so excellent in logistics, as Caro mentioned, money laundering, the ability to organize and the ability to communicate with lots of people and be very direct and keep things in order. And those are skills you see in women in international business. And I think you see them in organized crime. And those are those skills that are admired and they're brought in. And so, but again, I think historically, men and women come up the ranks through the family unless they have some amazing skill set, and then they're recruited.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I really love this reflection because it helps us, or it pushes us to, confront our own gender biases. I mean, there is no reason to assume that only women get involved in the business through those, family ties, family networks. But it does me raise the question of what is the pattern with criminal organizations such as the Zetas, no? I mean, that are imagined at least as more, as I said, like disembedded, no? I mean, and not so much developed, or perhaps it's a wrong idea, no? Perhaps they are also linked to family ties, and the participation or the patterns of participation are similar to the classic Sinaloa cartel structure. I don't know. Deborah, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, a former DEA officer said to me about Marjorie Chacon Rossell, who at one point the US Treasury Department described as Central America's most prolific drug trafficker. He said that she was a middle-class girl, she had a university education. He said to me, had she gone into, the illicit world, she could well be on, the Forbes 500, whatever, on the front of Best CEO magazine or whatever. And she just so happened to go into the money laundering and drug logistics business. She got in through her husband's connection to the Lorenzana, Guatemala drug trafficking mafia that was dismantled. But it's totally true what Elaine says, that men and women mostly get in through these clan-based structures, they're cousins or brothers or mothers or fathers or whatever. But that fact is used to minimize the role of women, whereas with men, it's like just how they got into the business. It's not used to minimize their role at all, which again is just this totally like gender-based notion about women's contribution and capacities. And it's something that's so fundamental. I just don't think it's even questioned, and this is the problem with all of the way that women are perceived. It's like these understandings of things have been repeated and reiterated, and they're so endemic to the way that this area is understood, that even saying that, people will be like, oh yeah. And it's like, it's so bad that we minimalize women's role for that. So yeah, no, I think absolutely. I mean, most of the women I covered came in through their families or were sort of the next in line in a family structure where people were like gradually getting killed off, and then there were people stepping up to sort of take their place, which is something of an occupational hazard in organized crime. But I also think, Felia Allen's work on the mafia is really, on the mafia in Italy is super interesting too, because I also think that women struggle to perceive themselves as powerful in certain in certain structures. So like one of her papers was about the wife of a mafia boss. I don't remember the details, I'm afraid, and I don't know the sort of star people in Italian organized crime the way I do in Mexican. But you know, once the husband was put away, she was kind of in charge. She picked up but she couldn't see herself as the next in command. She was just the messenger, even though she was making decisions and she was, you know, delegating. Like, she could not perceive herself in that role. And I think that's also really an important factor in our region, is women struggle to see themselves as powerful because they're also kind of bought in to the perception of them as minimal, you know. And I think, you know, and we've all experienced this in real life in different ambits, right? Where we're in male environments and it's hard to perceive yourself as it's a perception that's hard to kind of change in your mind because of the way that we've been socialized. And I think that's the case for women in organized crime as well.
Thank you, Deborah. Carolina, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I always pose the same question through audience full of men who take the decisions at home. And the answer I mean, at least in Latin America, right? And they always answer, my wife. And I always ask, but why do we think in organized crime should be different? It is that the woman don't take the decisions, or is that they are not aware of, as Deborah was telling. But it's absolutely probably that they are the ones making the strong decisions, the stronger decisions, even though then men would, you know, develop the idea, for example. And that's also something that appears when men are incarcerated, for example, as Patricia, ELAINE, and Deborah were mentioned. It is true that many of the women in the highest level had inherited the power from their husbands once they are in prison. But if they are dead, there may be, you know, a fight through different male figures not to let that woman live. She is like, the idea, I don't know if I'm clear, but the idea is that you need the support of a man behind you. Of course, there are exceptions, right? But this is something that is very strong in many of Latin American criminal organizations. Another thing, and very short because we need to close, is that not only family ties are that sentimental ties that bring women or men to criminal organizations. Friendship, love stories, partnerships, the need to belong to a certain organization, society, being marginalized, are those also things that bring women and men to criminal organizations.
Thank you, Carolina. That's absolutely true. And so we have around, 7 minutes to finish. So the last question I had, and I think this panel gives part of the answer to that, was about what can we do, right? What can we do from, like your perspective as journalists, as academics, to, promote a more nuanced understanding of participation of women in these criminal organizations. So we have, as I said, 7 minutes. So if any of you brave enough to talk, just give me one key point or 2 key points in 2 minutes each.
Oh my God.
Patricia.
Well, I feel there is a sensitive gap between media and academia. And as a researcher, we have to prepare to be more approachable for the audience of the media. A lot of times we heard a researcher that we don't understand nothing. So maybe we must be less academic and more understandable, in the media, more scientific and less sensationalistic. So We have to fight against the invisibility of women in every space of our societies. But I think women are every time more and more influential in politics, business, education, as we can see, research, and even organized crimes, obviously. But we have to balance all our work, and please, academic people must be more understandable for person of the audience of the media.
I agree. Deborah, please, you want to add to that?
I would say two things. The first is, I think as times shift and the world is ready for this, the fact that we're even having this conversation is huge. I mean, it's kind of, sometimes I'm like amazed that this is a new area of research and these are new conversations happening when this isn't a new trend, as Elaine's historical work has shown. And two, the other thing to do is just keep doing the work, keep bringing those cases to public attention, like having these conversations about how, yes, women can be bad. Yes, we can kill. Yes, we can be violent, which is still uncomfortable, I think, for contemporary society. And I understand that, but I do think to better understand organized crime, we just have to keep doing the work and doing the investigations.
Elaine.
I agree, making it understandable, doing the work, also for, historians and people interested in the past, work with librarians and archivists. They are your partners and they can help you and find, they're information specialists. I see one of my former students is attending and he's a librarian. Thanks, Ray. So, just again, I think just really looking to build those partnerships, asking questions and asking those difficult questions of the sources and being tenacious and doing the research. I think that is the most important, and not blindly accepting everything just because somebody has written, a book talking about all the guys. There's always look at the complexity and the context and dismantle that.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Carolina, very briefly, 1 minute.
I can only agree with that. What can I tell you? We have to keep on doing our job. We have to keep on posing uncomfortable questions. I should say that when we do that, in many cases, the people we interview, are like shake and start figuring out also what is happening there. They challenge the way they are thinking, and that's very important to bring the change. Also, I think that is very important to highlight all the evidence we have gathered and all the cases you have built, for example, in order to show that there are women in organized crime, that they may be criminal actors and they have to be treated like that. Otherwise, the public policies we are building are not good enough because they are not capable of responding of what is actually happened in the criminal world.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic and I've learned a lot, and I'm very happy that our conversation is gonna be, recorded, or it's being recorded. So I'm gonna come back to it, and I'm sure other audience will come back to it. And thank you to each one of you for your amazing work. And hopefully this will be the first of many, many more conversations, and just looking forward to keep learning from you guys. And thank you for this conversation. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the OC24 podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. This talk was just one of 85 from this year's 24-hour conference on global organised crime. To get access to the rest, head over to oc24.heysummit.com. Thanks for listening.